Hello, my name is Cameron Hennings, and on this YouTube channel, which you may or may not be already subscribed to, I've primarily discussed the medium of animation and the emotional impact that so many series have left on me over the years. But today, I'd like to ask you if it's okay for me to just this once turn your attention towards a show that, while not animated, has managed to leave a significant impact on my life. Alright, now that the tone is set, I'm going to talk normally. This should come as no surprise to you, but television was my life as a kid. Okay, well, try to act a little surprised, but I feel like it was over for me when my parents let me finally have a TV in my bedroom. Normally, my nightly TV options were whatever primetime programs my parents watched, but now that I had my own TV, the world of late night became much more accessible to me, and despite still being in elementary school, I started to watch a lot of Adult Swim. Am I allowed to admit that now? I mean, I'm 28 years old, the damage is done. Initially, I was watching the more basic Adult Swim programs like Family Guy, King of the Hill, Futurama, shows that started on Fox and not Adult Swim. I will say that the other animated shows, while more confusing to me at the time, did captivate me every so often. But I could not say the same for the various live-action shows that were also airing on Adult Swim. I would see commercials for shows like Tim and Eric or The Eric Andre Show and think, who is that for? It turns out, me, actually. Once I was in college, I had my comedic third eye awoken by the powers of higher education. What once felt stupid and pointless evolved into some type of catharsis that would assist me in forgetting about the pressures of early adult life. There's one show that stands out above the others, however, one that I didn't truly discover until I, like the rest of the global population, suddenly had a lot of free time on my hands. And this show was called Joe Pera Talks With You, a series where comedian Joe Pera, you got it, talks with you.
Hello, this is Joe Pera. I figured I'd let you know about a new program I made called Joe Pera Talks With You.
Now I know that this may seem like a strange pick for me to go against my brand for, and yeah, it is. But it also kind of isn't, because even if this show isn't animated except for one episode, I can confidently say that Joe Pera is without a doubt one of us. And by that, I mean that he is an animation nerd.
Movies are pretty good. Have you seen Spirited Away?
What is it?
It's called anime.
Not for me.
Super Saiyan 2.
So please, hear me out on this one. I had no idea who Joe Pera was prior to watching this series. I do faintly remember seeing promos for the show during commercial breaks and being perplexed by the presence of this suspiciously soft-spoken man who looked like he made a wrong turn on his way to PBS.
Dude, what the f***? Why are you f***ing here, man? You're so old. Where's your wife? Go home to your family, dude.
But believe it or not, Joe had already made his Adult Swim debut all the way back in 2016 in his infomercial special, Joe Pera Talks You to Sleep.
Hey, I just realized. Sheds are little barns.
And later in 2016, it was followed up by the true pilot for the series, Joe Pera Helps You Find the Perfect Christmas Tree. Although that one wasn't an infomercial, it was its own special entirely.
You married me. Only because you're so good at sex.
To clarify, Adult Swim uses the program title of infomercials to air experimental comedy shorts like Too Many Cooks. And if you've never heard of Too Many Cooks, then you're probably more well-adjusted than I am.
Too many cooks.
Some of these infomercials have gone on to become full-fledged series, which is what happened here. But compared to everything else on the network, Joe Pera Talks With You, on the surface at least, does not present itself as your traditional Adult Swim series. It isn't as mean-spirited or even as stupid as some of their more successful shows. I do mean stupid as a compliment, by the way.
It's free real estate.
It's just earnest. Joe Pera, as a character, finds joy through learning about and teaching people the most mundane or niche topics imaginable. He's a middle school choir instructor, he loves breakfast food, he takes relaxing fall drives in his Buick Park Avenue. He has a basset hound named Gus, and he takes his Nana to the beauty parlor every Friday, followed by a fish fry dinner. Dare I say, Joe Pera is just a guy.
Oh, crap. Apple turnovers are 2 for 1 at Econo Foods.
As I started watching this series for the first time, it didn't take long for me to realize that this was going to be a new comfort show for me, as listening to Joe's voice seems to carry the same effects as taking a melatonin before bed.
Sausage. Rye toast. Donut. Nanners on cereal.
And after multiple rewatches, I can confirm that the feeling of comfort is what this show strives for, with of course a slight dash of some absurdist Adult Swim humor.
What are you doing here? How old are you? Don't have a cow, man.
Fine.
However, as is the results of repeated watch-throughs, I've come to the realization that Joe Pera Talks With You is not just comforting, but that it is providing a perspective on the very concept of comfort itself. The definition of comfort may be universal, but its interpretation varies significantly from person to person. To provide you with an example of what I mean, I asked my friends what they consider their personal comfort films to be. And as you can see, there is a lot of variance here, with titles ranging from obvious childhood nostalgia to picks that make me actively concerned for their well-being. Bringing the focus back to Joe, it's obvious that he finds comfort in both his home of Marquette, Michigan, and the community that inhabits it, some being more major figures than others, like his best friend Gene.
Yes, sir.
And his Nana.
I'm gonna kill you with my pots and pans.
The violence is ingrained in us.
With these influences in mind, it makes a lot of sense as to why Joe's disposition feels so out of sync with his physical age. The man is a product of his own environment, for better or worse. And when I say worse, what I mean is that this character is disconnected from many of the realities of our modern world, despite living in it.
I finally tried Starbucks coffee. A little fancy for my taste, but boy do I feel alive.
I have an analogy that I'd like to present to you, one that's inspired by the Simpsons movie of all things. Knowing my audience, I likely don't have to go into too much detail about what this movie is about, but the basic premise is that the EPA has deemed Springfield a quarantine zone after Homer dumped a silo of pig feces into their already toxic lake.
Drive! Oh, right.
And to establish this quarantine, they drop a giant glass dome over the entire city of Springfield. Now, back to Joe Pera. The town of Marquette, while not physically underneath an inescapable glass dome, does seem to impart an effective isolation onto Joe and many of its other citizens, which is a rather common occurrence in the case of many American cities like Marquette. The natural beauty of the UP is showcased frequently in Joe Pera Talks With You, and it doesn't even feel like a bold claim at all for me to say that this series is a love letter to this region of America. Personally speaking, I've never been to Michigan, nor have I ever really felt a burning desire to ever go there. Having been born and raised in the suburbs of Los Angeles, the quiet small-town lifestyle of the Upper Peninsula feels completely alien to me. And as I was being introduced to this area through the various location shots in the first episode, my initial impression was that it looked like a very sad and boring place to live. If anyone from Marquette happens to be watching this, please do not take offense. This just boils down to my own tastes. What can I say? I'm weak Southern California trash with my iced lattes and my avocado toast and my woke ideology.
I'm an LA guy too. I'm psyched for all my friends who are killing it.
But I'll tell you this. As I continued to watch, it didn't take long for the charm of Marquette and the UP as a whole to shine through, making me yearn for a life that's in a much quieter part of the world. I understand why people would want to spend their whole lives here, but this does serve to reinforce the idea of living under a dome. Why make yourself uncomfortable by leaving a place you're already comfortable in? Why expose yourself to new people and ideas when you already know everyone within a 20-mile radius and they all think and speak in the same ways that you do? This is how the dome gets created, and it's understandably scary to leave it. But over the course of Joe Pera Talks With You, we see that dome within his mind slowly but surely get chipped away at, as new faces and personalities begin to make their way into both Marquette and Joe's life. So without further ado, let's dive into Joe Pera Talks With You. The first episode, Joe Pera Shows You Iron, begins with what's essentially the start of a documentary, as we're treated to historical footage and photographs, complete with Pera's narration and some Ken Burns effects for good measure. But this presentation on the history of iron production in Marquette gets interrupted by a knock at Joe's door.
2 billion years.
And upon opening it, he's greeted by a family looking to tour his house, as someone apparently planted a for sale sign on his front lawn without him knowing. Caught off guard, but too nice and non-confrontational to tell them that his house isn't for sale, Joe just lets them in and allows them to go crazy around his house.
I So we make some turkey, huh? You wanna get in the oven? Come on!
This room's mine. Okay.
He never works up the courage to say that his house isn't for sale, and it ends with them expressing interest in buying it. This causes Joe to spiral for the rest of the episode, contemplating what leaving Marquette might mean for him, demonstrating that the first crack in the dome has occurred. This is the Melsky family, by the way, and out of them all, it's really the father Mike that pushes Joe's buttons the most. He's portrayed by Connor O'Malley, who in addition to being a fellow comedian, is a longtime friend of Joe Pera. O'Malley and Pera each operate on completely different sides of the comedy spectrum, and because of this, Mike ends up becoming a wonderfully chaotic foil to Joe throughout the series. Attempting to seek guidance through this chaotic situation, Joe reaches out to his friend Gene, owner of the most buttery smooth voice in human existence.
As you write. Pyrite and the Lake Superior agate.
Gene is an eccentric man who seems to be not just a friend, but a role model to Joe, offering sage wisdom in a way that only Joe seems to understand, and sharing a mutual love for knowledge and discovery, much to the dismay of Gene's wife Lulu, who Joe is afraid of.
Oh, hi, Lulu.
Hey, Joe. Please don't come over here.
But due to their brains operating on similar wavelengths, he isn't able to provide much insight or comfort. After Joe has been forced to ponder further about a life outside of Marquette, visiting and gazing upon its various landmarks with appreciation, he stumbles upon the Melskys at the diner, approaching them and passionately expressing how much he doesn't wish to leave. Only for Sue, the mother, to tell him after his speech that they put an offer in for the actual house on his street that was for sale, and they didn't bother informing him because it's awkward. It's after this conversation that we see Joe paying a visit to his Nana, who is by far the most normal character in this entire series. She's just your textbook grandma, which I'm sure is the point, as the role was originally intended for Joe's real-life grandmother, who portrayed the character in the original pilot for the series. She unfortunately passed away in 2017, and in order to cast a woman who embodied a similar energy, Pera went to Fish Fries to scout a woman that fit the role. And this is where he found Nancy Cornell. However, for reasons that I can't seem to find an answer to, the role was recast in season 2, going to Pat Verne Harris, best known at the time for her character in Detroiters.
Gentlemen, thank you. You've made an old lady very, very drunk.
We'll walk you out.
I'm bringing all of this up because it's actually less about who she is and more about how strong the bond is between her and Joe. He sees her as not just the woman who raised him into the kind soul that he is, but also as his best friend, his ultimate source of comfort. If we're thinking about this dome that's within Joe's mind, which has been cracked by the chaotic Melskys,
I need an ice cream.
she is the one that goes in to repair it, allowing Joe to once again feel at peace, knowing that everything is right in the world so long as he has his Nana to talk to. And that's what we learn from this first episode. Later on, in episode 3, we're introduced to another new citizen in Marquette that will go on to change Joe's life even more so than the Melskys.
Excuse me, sir? Do you have a legitimate reason to be in this school parking lot?
Sarah Connor, no, not that one, is portrayed by Joe Firestone. No, not that one. Or that one. She's another comedian and friend of Joe Pera in real life. With each new character that gets introduced, I can't help but think that this show seems to operate as a vehicle for more niche comedians to get some screen time. And honestly, I'm here for it. Recently hired to be the new band instructor at the middle school, she starts appearing more frequently in Joe's life, quickly leading to the two of them developing feelings for one another. But due to his innocence, Joe is a bit slow on the uptake when it comes to even recognizing that he's falling for her. Their romance begins at a coworker's wedding, where they share a few casual dances together and pick each other's brains on some strange topics.
Do you think that US AI or Chinese AI will be the first to learn how to dance?
As far as I'm concerned, this is Joe Pera's love language, and their chemistry becomes more and more apparent as the evening goes on. Joe returns home happy, and he attributes that happiness to how much he loves dancing, as that is what the episode was supposed to be about. But it's obvious to us that he's happy about more than just dancing.
I wish I had a copy of Black Swan on DVD. I'd watch that whole movie right now.
We get to see Joe ride this emotional high through the next batch of episodes, the peak of which can be seen in Joe Pera Reads You the Church Announcements, where instead of reading said church announcements, he instead informs the congregation that he has recently discovered the song Baba O'Reilly by The Who for the first time. This episode is widely regarded by fans as the best of the entire series, and for good reason. It's a masterpiece. Without drifting too far from my thesis, the story of this episode works as perfect characterization for Joe, demonstrating just how sheltered of a human being he is. Because Baba O'Reilly is, as Mike puts it,
"It's everywhere, all the time. How have you not heard of it? What are you, an idiot?"
No.
And for all we know, Joe could have heard it before. But what this reads to me as is that due to his heightened emotional state, he's becoming more conscious of life itself. Cracks in the dome are allowing fresh air to ventilate in, subtly exposing Joe to new concepts and ideas that evidently expand his horizons. And Baba O'Reilly is just the start. It's very endearing, and so is the moment that he decides to share his love for the song with Sarah, who we can see is quite charmed by his innocent excitement.
You know it's not called Teenage Wasteland?
Yeah, I know.
It doesn't take too long for them to finally pursue one another romantically, starting with Sarah asking Joe to go on a snowmobile date with her at the end of the next episode. And of course, Joe agrees, but Mike does ruin the moment for him.
You gotta take a picture of pee-pee, send it to the girl over there.
You know what, Mike? New year, new rules. You bust my chops, I bust your lip.
Oh shit. During their date, although it's probably something more casual than that, Sarah decides to be vulnerable, sharing with Joe her dream of playing the French horn in the Cleveland Philharmonic. And to return her willingness to be vulnerable, he also shares a dream of his, which is to work for the Alberta, Canada Rat Control Program, an organization that works to not just reduce, but effectively nullify any chance of a rat population to exist within Alberta. It's a real thing, and I've provided a link in the description to their website, as it is what Joe would want. The pure insanity of this excites Sarah, encouraging him to write a musical about its origins for the students to perform instead of Hello Dolly.
Fuck Hello Dolly.
Yeah, I'd see a show about rats.
Fun fact, that line got this episode a TVMA rating. This entire episode can be viewed as an exercise in both trust and vulnerability, as demonstrated through Sarah's support and encouragement to make this play. But at the same time, we know Joe well enough by this point that the more hyper-specific an interest of his is, the more emotional weight it carries. And sure enough, come time for opening night, he wants the audience to walk away with the same amount of passion and interest that he has. Which, sure, that's a nice sentiment to have, but that ain't gonna happen because not everyone is Joe. Sarah is aware of this, giving Joe a gentle warning as she eyes the weighty stack of handwritten pages filled with context and history, all of which he intends to share with the audience.
Joe, I think you might tire them out. Maybe you could just stick to fire exits and, thanks for coming, that kind of thing.
It's only 15 minutes.
No, Joe, just tell them to turn off their cell phones.
And come showtime, Joe chooses to ignore her warning, prompting Sarah to break the trust that she's cultivated by cueing the band to start while he's talking. And despite the show going over just fine, Joe is panicking backstage the entire time over the audience not having the full context to what they're watching.
This would have made so much more sense if they saw a map.
Joe is hurt over how this person, who he made himself vulnerable to, who encouraged him to share what he's passionate about, betrayed that trust so quickly. Sarah knows that she both fucked up, but is also not in the wrong here, resulting in her not only standing her ground, but unloading some truths onto Joe in the process.
It's not a big deal, especially when you think of what's going on. There's rising water levels and nuclear war. What about solar flares, huh? You ever think about that? Or the Yellowstone caldera, how about that?
And within these truths, she reveals more about herself than she may have intended.
Is that what you think about?
It'd be dumb not to. You'd be dumb not to have a fortified basement. And I like you, but I shouldn't. I just wish you thought about real stuff.
So, Sarah is a doomsday prepper, and her feelings for Joe frustrate her. This soft-handed choir teacher is not a survivalist, and the things that he cares about are so unimportant in comparison to the actual horrors of our modern world, which is a reality that Sarah has made herself painfully aware of to a mentally harmful degree. They're two sides of the same coin in terms of showing what kind of road the pursuit of knowledge can lead you down. But it's through this conversation that we start to see why Joe Pera Talks With You is a commentary on comfort. As stated previously, the meaning of comfort varies from person to person. And in the case of Sarah and Joe, this single conversation lays the groundwork for their entire relationship going forward, as they try to better understand one another. Returning once again to the idea of the dome, while Joe has lived under this dome for his entire life, Sarah has willingly placed herself under it. She's well aware of its existence, and she's hoping that it's structurally sound enough to keep her safe from the outside world. But as a result of this argument, Joe can not only see the barrier between him and the rest of the world now, but he's noticing the cracks that have already begun to form. And it's through this damaged area that he's being exposed to all the things that he's been previously sheltered from, the very things that Sarah herself is terrified of due to possessing too much information about them. This revelation causes Joe to spiral for a bit, his inquisitive nature only adding fuel to the fire by researching further into how doomed we are as a species. And the more that he talks to people, like his students for example, he begins to consider his own ignorance.
It really saddens my heart sometimes that I know that I'm gonna die someday, and all my friends and family.
Holy shit, are you alright, kid? The stress gets so bad for Joe that he dreams of going bald while chasing after Sarah in her snowmobile, ending ominously with the words fortified basement. Surely to seek comfort of some sort, Joe is spending time with his Nana, and seeing that he is not in a good place right now, she cuts him off mid-sentence after he begins asking her a question about the ethical implications of military drones, asking him a question to help snap him back into his normal self, which is...
When you getting married?
Huh. I bought this at the mall store so you'd stop asking.
It's almost like you can see a switch flip in Joe, instantly relaxing and joking once more, demonstrating what truly differs between him and Sarah. While Sarah gains comfort from having a fortified basement and shutting herself away from others, Joe's Nana is able to provide what is essentially that same sense of security, but for him. And it's not just her. Joe has fostered comfort in the tight-knit community of Marquette, which stands in contradiction to the very reason why Sarah moved to Marquette in the first place. She wanted to distance herself from people due to her agoraphobia, but through meeting Joe, she's already failed at that exploit. Because Joe is not just a good person, he's an actual byproduct of the goodness that humanity possesses. But Sarah hasn't held any faith in humanity for a long time. Joe heads over to Sarah's to reconcile later that evening, and during their conversation, Joe politely asks Sarah if he can see her basement, to which she hesitantly agrees.
Please don't judge me. It's a work in progress.
Okay.
The reveal of her basement is quite spectacular, as she has already gathered enough supplies to support herself for 2.5 years.
Wow, look at all those beans.
This space is a representation of who Sarah is, with each container of provisions revealing more and more of herself. Only someone like Joe could get her to open up like this, and naturally, he's incredibly kind and curious about everything she's showing him. But there is a question that's nagging away at him, eventually working up the courage to ask her.
How do you have this, but you're also a teacher? It's like you believe in the future, but you're also afraid of it.
To which she responds,
No, I'm not afraid of it, because I have this basement.
To Joe's credit, he's always been aware of the evils that humanity possesses, but it goes against his very nature to not believe in the best in others. But due to Sarah's fears and anxieties about the world, she believes that everything in her basement is 100% necessary. This is a piece of character development for Sarah that comes up later, but I think it's worth mentioning now to provide full context as to why Sarah is the way that she is. As a child, she witnessed her brother get trampled to death in a Black Friday mob rush. This reveal is definitely intended to be played for a laugh, as it's very in line with much of the dark humor that's on Adult Swim. But the more that you take into account what kind of effect this would have on not just a witness, but the sibling of the victim, Sarah's trauma becomes all the more clear and rational. Black Friday sales have historically been proven to evoke the worst traits found in humanity, between greed and overall selfishness.
I got my fist up if somebody tries to steal something from me.
The Black Friday related death count is not high, but there is a death count nonetheless, so it doesn't take any stretch of the imagination imagination to see how that sort of trauma can lead to agoraphobia and losing any and all faith in human kindness. But that's the beauty of her relationship with Joe, as he represents a second chance of sorts to bring her out of that darkness and to open herself up to others again, starting with him. Season 2 opens on a joyous note, with Joe conducting his choir through singing The Mighty Quinn, which was written by Bob Dylan and first performed by Manfred Mann. As the kids continue to sing, we're given a montage of Joe and Sarah going about their new life as a couple. But what's more interesting here is that we're shown a nameless citizen of Marquette climbing onto his roof to replace a window screen panel, then proudly admiring his house once the job is done. Now this is 100% a stretch, but to keep in line with my dome analogy, I'm choosing to view this as a representation for the repair of Joe's mental state. He's now embracing the new information he's learning, and rather than completely patching the hole left by Sarah's truth bombs, he's showing willingness to embrace change. Season 2 represents a new beginning for Joe and Sarah, as their love for each other starts to grow in tandem with Joe's big summer project, a bean arch.
I'm going to grow an arch of snap pole beans. Imagine that. Not having to bend over to pick a bean. There are a number of vegetables you can grow on an arch, but I chose beans because good flavor. I'm getting carried away.
Beans aside, you can already see Joe and Sarah settling into their new relationship, thinking more outside themselves, while still remaining true to who they are and attempting to find common ground, or in some cases, compromise. Vulnerability is required for successful relationships, and it's vulnerability that evidently led Joe and Sarah to expressing their feelings for each other at the end of last season. In these first 2 episodes, we see both Sarah and Joe find those moments to open up and allow themselves to be honest. Of course, it's much easier for Joe to do this than Sarah, but his strength here is always making that first step, although Joe's confessions are much like him, goofy and non-serious.
I slapped my hands on my pants when the ice cream store is closed.
And while this is funny, it does the job by helping Sarah feel more at ease, lowering her guard and opening up to Joe in response.
It takes me years to trust someone, and seconds to untrust. I wish this weren't true.
She has a bit more to work on. Acceptance seems to be the most recurring theme within Season 2 of Joe Pera Talks With You. And that's not even strictly applied to Joe and Sarah's acceptance of each other as people, with vastly different perspectives on life. We're seeing various flavors of change occurring in this season that force Joe and the people around him to evaluate what's most important to them. But before you can reach that first step towards acceptance, you must first acknowledge what's right in front of you. In episode 4, Joe Pera guides you through the dark, Marquette gets hit with a power outage. Joe takes this opportunity to check in on the Melskys, only to get assaulted by the kids who are being egged on by Mike, naturally.
It's Frankenstein! Kick his ass!
Wait a minute.
I think I just slapped it! Frankenstein's chick! Oh no!
It's all connected. When Sue comes out to break up the fight, you immediately notice this frustration that she's directing specifically at Mike.
Sorry, Joe. Here, you can have Mike's ice cream bar.
It's okay.
Eat it.
This frustration even carries over into the next episode, when Joe bumps into her at the supermarket. This time, it's about a new diet that Mike has started that he heard about from the Joe Rogan Experience. It's called All Chicken Diet, and it involves him fasting all day, except for the whole rotisserie chicken that he eats for dinner, which he consumes in the shower, leaving nothing but a pile of bones that Sue has to pick up afterward. Just pure goblin-ass behavior.
Well, at least he's losing weight.
He's put on weight.
Things come to a head in the following episode, as we see Joe and Mike at Sue's brother's bachelor party. And Mike is... fine. He's fine. Now, the reason why Joe is here is only because he owns a very large cooler. He doesn't know any of these guys, except for Mike, who unfortunately comes in second for most toxic personality in attendance.
Does anybody got a pill speaker? We need to get some boom boom pow in here.
Played by Carmen Christopher, Carlos is like every crypto bro and Elon Musk shill that I've ever met.
I actually teach middle school choir.
Nice, dude. I'm in sales. I wish I was pulling down 6 figures like you, though. I'm actually saving up right now so I could buy this plane. Check it out.
Wow.
I love him so much, and I also fucking hate him. Anyway, Mike beats the shit out of him for eating all the hot dog buns.
The world's tallest barstool, boy!
Okay, kind of. After he gets pulled off of Carlos, though, he starts to explain that Sue kicked him out of the house and that he might be getting a divorce.
And she wants nothing to do with me! And we haven't boned since Brexit!
In other words, Sue acknowledged the cracks that were forming within her relationship and accepted that something needed to change.
But to Sarah, an event like this is a reminder that our system has cracks that could expand into a break.
The possibility of the Melskys' divorce doesn't really affect Joe, but it does manage to weigh on his mind a bit between moments of calm, such as when he's teaching Jean's wife Lulu how to play a song on the piano before their anniversary party, or waking up in the middle of the night to watch YouTube videos with Sarah until the sun rises. And best of all, seeing the completion of his bean arch and giving everyone he knows a bowl of beans. Even if things may be rough for other people, life has been good for Joe lately, and he wants to help people find that happiness too. The solution that he lands on is to hold his own rat race, based off the 2001 comedy Rat Race. Joe drives up to Copper Harbor, a town that's 145 miles away from Marquette, and places $115 in cash into a locker, encouraging his friends to race there and claim the prize for themselves. Nobody really wants to go, except for Brad Cam, who was the best man at the wedding that Joe and Sarah connected at, and this other guy, Jeff.
Rat race!
But none of that is really important, actually, as it's in this episode where Joe gets hit with some upsetting news.
Honey, you need to get over to the hospital right away. It's Nana. I just called an ambulance.
Is everything all right? What's going on?
As Joe and Sarah return from the hospital, the silence accompanying them manages to tell us everything we need to know about what happened. A silence that's uncomfortably broken by the triumphant return of Brad and Jeff, $115 in hand. They're confused by Joe's lack of enthusiasm, so Sarah informs them about what's happened.
Hey guys, Joe's Nana passed away this afternoon.
Oh my God.
Joe's Nana was by far the most important person in his life. And now that she's gone, so is that lifelong emotional security that Joe has always been able to rely on. That isn't to say that he lacks a support system, as he still has Sarah and Jean, but losing her, especially so suddenly, does take its toll on Joe. I've always been fascinated by portrayals of grief and loss in comedy, as it always seems to force the humanity out of characters in such compelling ways. And when it comes to Joe Pera Talks With You, that's exactly the case. Knowing what we do about Joe's real-life Nana passing away, the sadness expressed in his performance feels both truthful and universally relatable. Whether it's the guilt that he feels for bringing a store-bought sandwich platter to the wake rather than making something from scratch, which is what she would have done, or his struggle to write a proper obituary within the local paper's max character limit. This is the harshest reality check that Joe has received. The dome is completely shattered, and rather than fixing it, all he can really do is pick up the pieces. In the episode following his Nana's wake, Joe accompanies Jean on a trip to Milwaukee, with the purpose behind it being that Jean's sons are holding a fashion show to debut their new collection. It makes sense that Joe would want to leave Marquette for a bit, and what better way to cope than a boys trip? It's important to mention that prior to leaving on this trip, Joe told Sarah that he might move here if he enjoys it enough, which is only natural, as Joe is attempting to distance himself from Marquette both physically and emotionally, as Marquette has now shifted from a place of comfort to a place of grief. The main storyline of this episode is centered around Jean's relationship with his sons. There's tension between them, as fashion seems to be a concept that Jean does not even attempt to understand.
Not to get political, but I wouldn't mind if the government gave us uniforms.
Remember that for later. We learn a lot about Jean in this episode, the biggest of which being that he spent a lot of time working on a freighter, which resulted in him being absent for a lot of his kids' childhood. And that's where a lot of this resentment comes from. He wants a second chance to connect, and they're not really willing to give it to him.
No problem. No problem at all. Maybe we should get going, Joe.
But despite this juicy family drama that's happening in front of him, Joe isn't really paying that much mind to any of it. He's doing his best to support Jean, but he's also just kind of along for the ride here. He already came into this trip emotionally drained, and his attention is really just focused on what life outside of Marquette could be like. With his Nana gone, maybe a change of scenery might be nice. However, that would also mean leaving Sarah behind, who has permanently laid roots down in Marquette due to the construction of her fortified basement. But having the realization that the world is now open to him, why not take a risk for once in his life?
And then all my new coworkers would say, "Hey, would you want to meet us on Friday night for a beer on South Kinnickinnick Avenue?"
This train of thought gets interrupted by a certified fashion emergency, as Jean's sons ask their father if he can fill in for an injured model. He's hesitant, but after Joe offers encouragement, he agrees, leading to him confidently strutting down the runway and coming together with both of his sons on stage to close the show, recreating the wing design of the Milwaukee Art Museum. Through this experience, Jean has not only reconciled with his sons, but Joe has also had his curiosity reignited. Having had no opinions on fashion prior, Joe is pleasantly surprised to learn that fashion, along with all art, can truly come from anywhere. And as Joe is leaving the venue pondering these thoughts, he spends his last night in Milwaukee going to the one place that he wanted to see the most, the Mitchell Park Domes.
Oh my god.
Truth be told, I was not even thinking about this moment when I first thought of my dome analogy. That was the result of starting what I think was my third rough draft of this video essay. And while I don't believe that Pera had the same exact thought process when creating this show, I am at least willing to believe that this man just really likes domes. It's just a weird, spooky coincidence that this ended up working out the way that it did for me. However, this coincidence does manage to articulate my point in a very profound and beautiful manner. Prior to him leaving the show, Jean's sons told him that fashion can come from anywhere, an idea that was very much conveyed through their collection. And as Joe enters the Mitchell Park Domes with this thought on his mind, he compares the inspirations of fashion to the home of his Nana and what it represented to him.
A place of undeniable good in the world. And now that they're gone, I don't know if I'll ever be able to find that again.
But despite her home still being there, what it once represented can never be fully recovered now that she's gone forever. And yet, as he gazes up at the light display, he thinks of Sarah and begins to smile. This visit to the domes reminds him of what he values, what brings him comfort, and even if his eyes are now open to the world around him, he knows that Marquette will always be his home.
All right, I'll go home.
Returning from Milwaukee, Joe goes to the Melskys to retrieve his dog Gus. And shockingly, it's Mike who answers the door, explaining that he apologized to Sue in a very Mike Melsky sort of way.
I love you. I act like an idiot. I'm stupid. I think about you all the time. I'm so horny, and I don't know how to wash clothes. You're the hardest working and most compassionate person I ever met in my life, and I'll start eating vegetables again and no more all chicken diet.
But it's cute, it's pathetic, it's endearing, and it wraps up this story within a story beautifully. But the cherry on top of it all is this line that Joe says to Sue right before he leaves.
Sue, congratulations.
On what?
On your family.
Thanks.
You may be able to read this as just a sweet thing for Joe to say, but it reads much deeper than that to me. The idea of change has been on Joe's mind ever since he said goodbye to his Nana, and because of that, viewing change as anything but negative has been very difficult, especially when he knew that right across the street from him, the Melskys were falling apart. So for him to see Mike and Sue reconcile when he thought that maybe they wouldn't, it affirms to him that things can truly change for the better instead of for the worse, allowing Joe to embrace this as a new chapter of his life. He's matured from the anxious, rock-toting man who once only worried about what he was going to have for breakfast into a person that now knows both the beauty and pain that comes with caring about people. He can find that comfort he needs in what he already has, which means that the dome is now gone for good. However, if the dome is gone, doesn't that mean anyone or anything can enter his life? And if so, does that also apply to Sarah, who willingly sought out the dome's protection? It's hard to say.
You ready to go back to the rat race?
Rat race! Rat race!
Please don't mention that movie anymore.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
At the end of season 2, as both Joe and Sarah start a new school year, we're introduced to a new student that's in Joe's class.
Good morning, Mr. Pera.
Oh, you must be Gabriel Koskinen.
Yes, I'm Gabriel.
Now I'm going to be honest with you for a moment. I don't fucking trust this kid. If he was just a very well-spoken kid, then I don't think I would be bothered as much. But what made me suspicious of him is that after introducing himself to Joe, he pours himself a cup of coffee very nonchalantly without Joe noticing. And I think it's the fact that Joe does not notice this that alarms start to go off in my brain. Granted, I was already bothered by the presence of the coffee itself, as when Joe brewed it earlier, he tells the audience that it's his special classroom blend that he prepares with barely any coffee grounds, making for a very translucent pot of coffee. Already psychopathic behavior on Joe's part, but I can look past it. When Gabriel introduces himself to his classmates, we learn just how truly exceptional of an individual he is.
Hello, I'm Gabriel. I'm from the Hitopo Scientific Research Base in Antarctica, where my parents studied ecosystem resilience and adaptation. I was collectively raised by all the international scientists at the base, which might explain my unusual accent.
Based off of that introduction alone, Gabriel demonstrates himself to be somewhat of an antithesis to Joe's character. They've both spent most of their lives living in one place, sure, but Gabriel grew up in a cultural melting pot, while Joe has only ever known the culture of Marquette, at least as far as we know. I believe that the appearance of Gabriel is meant to represent a turning point for the story. Now that the dome surrounding Joe, and by extension Sarah, has been removed, their perceived world has expanded, and this in turn has an effect on them both. Joe, who has always possessed a desire to learn, is now more perceptive of those around him, particularly those with a more diverse background of knowledge. And Sarah, who is perceptive to a fault, is now challenging herself to push past her agoraphobic tendencies, which we can see right at the end of the episode when she makes the effort to sit next to a fellow teacher during their lunch break. But if opening up to others is Sarah's goal, then what's Joe's? If you recall, Joe's big project of season 2 was to create a bean arch, but in season 3, Joe has set his sights on building a chair. Likely inspired by Jean, who he tagged along with to the furniture store in search of a proper retirement chair. For the most part, it's just a simple running joke, as his main priorities this season are really split between the sale of his Nana's house and doing his best to be emotionally present for Sarah, who in many ways feels more like the protagonist of this season in comparison to Joe. Despite her best attempts last season to step outside of her comfort zone, Sarah appears to be more paranoid than ever before.
Hello, my name is Joe Pera.
We gotta go.
What?
We gotta get out of town. Grab your bug-out bag and be in my truck in 90 seconds.
But why is this paranoia hitting her so suddenly? Our answer actually lies in a conversation that she wasn't even present for. In episode 1 of the season, the manager of the furniture store has a very interesting line that's said in response to Joe asking him if Jean could work there part-time.
Well, it's 2018 and the economy's booming.
Oh.
So this season came out in 2021, the second season released in 2019, and the first premiered in 2018. It makes perfect sense that they would still be in 2018, but this line hits you like a slap in the face because of, you know, that big thing that happened in 2020 that we all experienced and have long-lasting trauma from. Or is that just me? While the actual events of 2020 are still a ways away for our characters here, Sarah's sense of impending doom feels all the more understandable with that in mind. I don't even think that it's much of a stretch to claim that this season is intended to be an emotional unpacking of the trauma that came about from the pandemic, which was by no means over by the time we entered 2021. I never worked on the set of Joe Pera Talks With You, although I very much wish that I did. But every film set that I worked on during this time had extremely strict rules when it came to testing and safety protocol. It was a very uncomfortable time to be making a TV show, and much of that fear that we all felt gets conveyed wonderfully through Joe Firestone's performance this season. In the second episode of the season, Joe and Sarah flee into the wilderness together, all based on a bad feeling that overcomes Sarah.
I just feel like something's gonna happen soon, and I just want to be as far away as possible from people.
And as night falls and they prepare dinner, Sarah manages to relax and reflect over her impulse to leave town. Joe is the only person that she can count on, as she has no one else in Marquette to turn to, and she recognizes the kind of burden that places on Joe, which brings her to the conclusion that she should probably make some friends. But given her admitted difficulties when it comes to trusting others, that's not a simple task.
After my brother was trampled, I just wanted to be alone. I didn't walk over a kid.
So to get started, she joins Sue Melski for a girls' night, along with Sue's 2 friends, Diane and Debin Jakonski Hammershunk. 10 out of 10 character name. All of whom are very comfortable with each other, causing Sarah to immediately feel like the odd one out. But lucky for her, the only 2 women that she's unfamiliar with here are already drunk, and the energy in the room shifts in her favor after she casually opens a peck of cheese with one of her knives. And the attention that she's earned is positive, as they ask her for a quick PSA about self-defense tools.
What is a good self-defense weapon?
Non-lethal? Like a small tactical flashlight, anything 300 lumens or more.
And after a few glasses of wine, Sarah is able to finally relax and get on their level a bit more.
What's it like dating Joe the plumber?
Well, we don't play chess every night, if that's what you're thinking.
Eventually allowing herself to open up to these women that she just met about the anxiety and dread that has been eating away at her lately.
I've been feeling like a scared heifer lately. Like something's about to happen.
Disregarding the amount of alcohol she's consumed, it says quite a lot about the progress that Sarah has made since first meeting Joe. Making friends was not the reason she moved to Marquette, but allowing Joe into her life was a critical first step that helped lead her here. Humans by nature find comfort within community, and I feel as though Joe has demonstrated this idea going all the way back to the first episode of the entire series. But unlike Joe, Sarah views community as not a comfort, but a danger. Speaking of Joe, while he still strives to talk to you about the things he's interested in, much of his role this season seems to be one of support towards not just Sarah, but everyone around him. After helping Jean secure a job at the furniture store and encouraging Sarah to branch out, we see him supporting the well-being of his students. This is first displayed as he is forced to take Nicole, the oldest Melski daughter, to the principal's office for referring to him in front of the entire class as
Mr. Pera Balls.
He's not so much mad at her, but looking for a reason as to why she might be acting out, suggesting to Mike and Sue that maybe she just needs her own room now that she's a teenager.
Get out.
Mike.
And yeah, that was the issue. She needed to get away from this goblin. And later on, we see Joe assisting Gabriel in a puppet-centric performance for his classmates during lunch, despite Joe's concerns centering around the art of ventriloquism.
Because as you and I both know, all ventriloquists are overtly Republican.
Up until this point, I don't think I would have even suggested that the show is political by any means. But given the already mentioned circumstances that season 3 was filmed under, combined with the also already mentioned frustrations and discomfort that people were feeling about those said circumstances, it's not too much of a surprise to see the veil of apoliticism be removed, even slightly.
And I was wondering if all magicians are libertarians.
People should be able to drive at age 12. And what do we say about taxes, Dee Dee? That's theft, bitch.
Alright, maybe forget that I said slightly. In real life, Joe Pera is a bit more transparent about his political views. I wouldn't say that he's a political comedian by any means.
Hope you have a happy holiday, though. Guantanamo Bay is still open. Good night.
But he definitely leans more towards the left side of the political spectrum. When you're making a show for network television, even if that network is Cartoon Network, you don't want to potentially isolate a portion of your audience by getting on a soapbox, at least not initially. But it's an inarguable fact that season 3 of Joe Pera Talks With You was produced during the most uncomfortable time for humanity in the 21st century. Even leading up to the pandemic, Americans in particular were already feeling some kind of way about everything happening around us. And once all hell broke loose, we in turn broke as well. We were tired. We still are. And it's through that tiredness that anger is able to manifest. Joe Pera does not present himself as an angry person, but he is a comedian, a storyteller. And so is Joe Firestone, Connor O'Malley, Dan Licata, Carmen Christopher, and every name that you see listed in the credits at the end of each episode. Comedy is intended to come from a place of personal experience. So when the collective experience of your entire team is anger, anxiety, fearfulness, whatever, the natural response is to channel that into what you're creating so that you and your audience can unpack these feelings together and have a good laugh about it, even if it does make us uncomfortable to confront these kinds of things. Anyway, this video is now political. Sorry not sorry if you can't handle that. As Sarah continues to get to know her new friends, they all go on a ski trip together, and after some casual day drinking, Debin starts bragging about an encounter she had with a certain politician who came into her bar the previous night. There isn't a name mentioned, but the context given reveals that she's referring to Betsy DeVos, the former US Secretary of Education, who was historically terrible at her job. Sarah, who we already know to possess strength and confidence in her convictions, is unable to hide her annoyance, informing the group of how this certain politician is trying to defund both public school programs and the Special Olympics, which she was. The group does not respond well to Sarah's gripes, which leads Sarah to call them all ding-dongs and storm off. This lashing out, although sparked by politics, ultimately goes beyond disagreement. Sarah allowed herself to be vulnerable to this group, only to be disappointed by them in an extremely personal way, which I will admit is not actually their fault. Callous remarks and teasing of Sarah aside, as Sarah simply holds her friends and the people that she cares about to a higher standard. A standard that must be impossible for most to meet, given her trauma and lack of willingness to give people a chance. And this fight only affirmed her negative outlook on humanity. That is, until her accidental collision with a snowboarder shortly after. Despite the negative feelings on both sides, the group immediately rushes to Sarah's aid.
Here, it's like a senzu bean.
Oh, thanks.
I was honestly not expecting a Dragon Ball reference in this moment, but I'm so glad that it happened. Demonstrating that regardless of their differing opinions, they all care about Sarah, but they also hate snowboarders.
No!
Sarah has always believed that there is safety in solitude, that forming connections with people can hinder her own survival, but it's because of their actions here that she's proven wrong. Political discourse, especially today, does have a tendency to destroy friendships, and that's precisely what Sarah thought had happened after she called them all ding-dongs and peaced out. And yet they still came to her rescue. Watching this play out for the first time, it made me happy for Sarah and hopeful that human kindness like this is still out there, even if it does feel like a rarity nowadays. There is, however, something else happening in this episode that touches upon the culture of politics in our modern day, as Joe gets called over to Jean's house for non-disclosed reasons. Upon arrival, Jean and Gabriel sit him down and start playing a video for him. We don't see what this video contains until 2 episodes later, but what we do see is a growing expression of pure amazement on Joe's face. When Sarah returns home, she sees that Joe is wearing a button with Jean's name on it, asking him to elaborate on why.
He showed me his campaign video that he put together with his team.
What for?
President of the world.
Gabriel is the kind of character that keeps me up at night. Like I said, I had an uneasy feeling about him the second he poured himself a cup of classroom blend coffee. I don't think he's a bad person, but I do think that he's too smart for his own good. And after he suddenly became acquainted with Jean, forming this 100-year plan that would be implemented should Jean become president of the world, I can't help but wonder what this show would have ended up becoming had it been greenlit for a 4th season. Because once they embraced their desire to make the show more blatantly political, they equally embrace the absurdism that many Adult Swim programs are known for. Jean's campaign video gives off the most Adult Swim vibes out of everything we've seen from the show so far, simulating some high-concept ideas, many of which centering around restructuring and expanding public transportation on a globally unified scale. But there is much more going on under the surface here. And believe it or not, it has nothing to do with the dome that you can see in the skyline of the futuristic city. Although it is an interesting thought for the dome analogy to be resurrected via the notion of a dictator constructing one, maybe as a method of either preventing people from entering or leaving it. But come on, Jean's not a dictator, right?
One concern is that president of the world sounds like a dictatorship.
No, Joe, no. I'll only stay in office until we can.
Oh no. And this proceeds to get darker, as Gabriel, being the smart kid that he is, somehow finds a way to accurately predict the stock market, meaning that they can secure the funds themselves to start this campaign. Already acquiring a power such as this, Jean's disposition suddenly shifts, ominously asking Joe, who has not been informed of this, if the stock market could be used for good. And Joe, with almost no hesitation, tells him no. But will this stop Jean? I don't know. I'm conflicted on what to even say here, as this development feels like such a radical turn from the reality that the show presented to us in the last 2 seasons. How did we go from a lesson about minerals to the potential for Jean to achieve world domination? It's not my favorite decision that was made, but I do think that a large part of my reaction has to do with the lack of resolution. Jean could very well not become president of the world. That seems like the most likely outcome, but I've thought that way before about other things, and well, look where we are now. The result of Jean's ambitions may never be revealed to us, but this development does manage to remind us of the uncertainty that the future holds, a feeling that unfortunately has not gone away despite everything that Sarah and even Joe have gone through this season. It's true that Sarah has now made a group of friends outside of Joe, but this hasn't completely alleviated her anxieties surrounding this invisible yet impending doom, still feeling the need to retreat into her basement whenever she begins to spiral, and given the frequency of how often this happens, it's begun to feel less like a proper solution to her issue.
I never spent that much time down here. People weren't made to live underground.
Echoing back to her response to Joe's question at the end of season 1, where he pointed out the hypocrisy of being a teacher while also having the basement, to believe in the future while also fearing it. She claimed that she wasn't scared for the future because she had her basement. But now, it's as if she's coming to the realization that her needs have changed. Joe was the catalyst that helped her restore at least some faith in humanity again. And the friends that she's now made, who rushed to her defense despite their perceived differences, have contributed even more so. Her brain is beginning to rewire itself thanks to these positive experiences. And she's realizing that maybe locking herself up in her basement isn't the answer. Meanwhile, Joe's also been in a bit of an emotional limbo after managing to finally sell his Nana's house, thus concluding the business that resulted from her passing.
This house is really special, Joe. G to G. I'll call you later with updates.
Thanks, Brad.
He has the freedom to move forward now, but he's struggling. Almost as if he doesn't want to accept that it's truly over now. He drives by the house post-sale and laments to Sarah about the barnstar that the new owners adorned it with. He's not allowing himself to move on, and I can't really blame him given the magnitude of his loss. As we watch Joe build this chair in a very quiet and methodical manner, he's periodically distracted by thoughts of both Sarah and Jean's campaign video. He's never paid so much thought to the future before, but now he's finding himself at a crossroads. If there is anything we've learned about Joe over the course of this series, it's that he's never been averse to trying new things. Whether it's writing a musical about rats, or growing a bean arch, or building a chair, he's built enough confidence and gained enough experience by this point that maybe it is time to make a change. And not just for his own benefit, but Sarah's as well. Using the profits from selling his Nana's house, Joe purchases 30 acres of land from John, a widower that he hitched a ride home with from the wedding back in season 1, which, if you recall, is the episode where Joe and Sarah's romance first began. I don't count the school parking lot in episode 2, where she thought he was a suspicious loiterer. He doesn't tell Sarah about this wild purchase he just made, opting to surprise her by taking her out to the property itself and then letting her know there.
I bought this from John with the money from Nana's house. Let's build a cabin or something.
The surprise on Sarah's face really says it all, a mix of joy and sheer disbelief, as she quickly realizes that this was the change that she needed. She excitedly explores the property, while Joe takes his newly constructed chair, planting it firmly in the snow and allowing himself to take a seat, basking in the present moment and choosing to look towards a much brighter future. And that's where Joe Pera Talks with You comes to an end. It takes a lot of courage to accept change, be it positive or negative. There are many reasons to be fearful of what change may bring into your life, but there are just as many reasons to embrace change as well. At the beginning of Joe Pera Talks with You, Joe was more than comfortable with his life and the routine that he had established. But when people begin to enter and exit your life, you start to notice a shift occurring within yourself. Through falling in love with Sarah, Joe's eyes were opened to a much larger world, albeit it was a much darker world, one that brought him active discomfort the more he learned about it. But he pushed past those feelings because Sarah herself did not represent that darkness. And as they both accepted each other for the people they were, it resulted in Sarah's eyes being opened as well. Her beliefs about the world were now being challenged, and her trauma was doing its best to keep her stagnant. She initially believed that the only way that she would ever be able to live comfortably was to literally close herself off from the rest of society. But that belief system started to crack once Joe helped restore her faith in humanity bit by bit, eventually finding a community that accepts her for who she is. Despite the initial hope for a season 4 that was unfortunately denied, the open-ended nature of this ending for the show is beautiful to me, as both Sarah and Joe seem to have finally met each other at the same mental crossroads. Joe's world is becoming more complicated, while Sarah's is becoming less. But when life grows more and more confusing for them both, and the only thing that seems to make sense to them is their relationship, It's admirable to see them meet in the middle by committing to building a better future together. Literally. The future, however we choose to define it, is always going to be unclear, but the best way that we can ensure it'll be better for all of us is to work together. Easier said than done, especially in this day and age, I know. No, really, I know. But if I've learned anything from not just Joe Pera, but through my own experiences of confronting the things that make me uncomfortable, it's that patiently taking one step at a time can lead to a deeper understanding of not just the world around you, but also yourself, allowing you to become more and more comfortable. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck. And also vote